Maren's hand was on my arm. The canvas bag was in my other hand, still closed, the second key inside it. The device was pointing straight down. The aperture was visible below, 3-4 seconds of clear depth. The circular void in the worked surface at 42 meters, open and present and directly beneath the Morwenna's keel. I did not reach into the bag. I want to record the sequence precisely because the reason I did not act is not what I expected it to be. It was not Maren's hand. She had stopped me for a moment, one beat, the contact enough to interrupt the motion, but I had registered the interruption and I was already deciding whether to continue when the 17-second cycle completed. The opacity returned, not gradually, the same way it had lifted, a quality change in the water column, a shift from depth to surface, the dark circle becoming opaque again on what felt like a threshold rather than a transition. One moment the aperture was visible, then the cycle ended, then it was not. Maren took her hand from my arm. She said, "That window's closed." Factual. The same way she would say the tide has turned. An observed condition, not a judgment. She did not say anything about the canvas bag or the second key or what I had been about to do. The moment had resolved itself, and she described the resolution, and that was sufficient. I set the canvas bag down on the deck. The device tone was still elevated. The higher frequency that had entered the signal when the aperture opened, the spike that had held rather than returning to baseline. It was still present, but the urgency was gone, if urgency is the right word for what I had felt. The pressure of the moment had belonged to the open window. The window was closed. The pressure had closed with it. I write, aperture visible approximately 4 seconds. Window closed on cycle completion. No action taken. Device tone remains elevated. I look at what I have written and add, this was not a failure of nerve. The window ended before the decision did. I am recording that because the gap between those two things matters for understanding what the system is doing. This was not a near miss. The timing was not mine to control. The structure opened for 4 seconds on a 17-second interval, and I was not in a position to act within that window, regardless of intention. This is what Maren means when she says the system runs on timing, not intention. I could not have put the key anywhere in 4 seconds, even if I had known that was what was required and where it needed to go. The system did not close on my hesitation. It closed on its own schedule. Hannah has been watching the sounder display. She says, stepping values are still cycling. The structure is still running. 17-second interval, 8-step depth sequence, same values. The aperture opening was one event within an ongoing operational state. The structure did not pause for our presence, did not extend the window, did not respond to the fact that nothing occurred. It is running what it runs. I ask Hannah to make a slow lateral pass, the same drift test she did earlier, moving north and south of the center line to see whether the sounder values change with position. She takes the helm and begins a slow northward drift. The sounder response is immediate. Within 10 meters of lateral movement, the stepping range compresses. The lower bound of the sequence rises. Where the values had been stepping to 83 meters at the center line, they now bottom out at 91. Less depth, less structural movement implied in the reading. She continues north. Another 10 meters. The range compresses further. At 20 meters north of center, the sounder is reading a nearly flat profile, 103 to 104 meters, a 2-meter variation rather than the 21-meter variation at the center line. We are off the aperture. The structure is still there, still running, still present beneath us. But at 20 meters offset, we are reading the surface of it rather than the internal geometry. Hannah brings the Morwenna back to center and the values return to the full range. She says, it's reading the opening, not the structure. The sounder at centerline is looking down through the aperture into the interior geometry. At offset, it is reading the flat worked surface from above. The depth discrepancy, 104 meters on the surface versus 42 meters at the aperture is the vertical extent of whatever space exists inside the structure. Approximately 60 meters of interior volume beneath the surface at 42 meters depth. I write this down and look at it for a moment. 60 meters of interior volume at 42 meters depth in open water. The structure is not resting on the seabed, it extends into it, or through it. Or it is the seabed at this location. The seabed here is this structure, and what we are measuring as depth variation is the internal architecture of something that has been here long enough to be indistinguishable from geology on any chart that did not know to look. I write, structure possibly integral to seabed formation at this location. Not placed on seabed may constitute seabed. Same class as accumulation site cliff integration. I underline the last phrase. The accumulation site was built from the headland, continuous construction. The same principle at much greater scale. Maren is at the chart room door. She says, that's what the 1887 map marks it as. Not a node, not a feature, a reference. She looks at the chart. The network doesn't index it because the network didn't find it. The network was built around it. She goes back into the chart room without adding anything. I look at Hannah. She is looking at the sounder display. She says quietly, then what's it a reference for? I do not answer because I do not have an answer. I write the question down instead. We hold position for another 30 minutes. Hannah documents 3 more full 17-second cycles on the sounder, capturing the stepping sequence values and interval timing as precisely as the instrument allows. The values are consistent across all 3 cycles. The same 8 steps, the same period. No variation. The structure has been running this sequence for longer than our presence here. It will continue running it after we leave. We have not changed anything by arriving. The 11-second interval has not returned. I have been noting that at regular intervals throughout the investigation, and I note it again now because its continued absence is information. The network interval, the rhythm that underlies the archive's operation, Rook, the title shelf, the accumulation site, is still absent. We are in the presence of something that preceded the network, and the network's interval is not what is running here. The offshore structure has its own count, and it does not defer to the network. During the 3rd cycle observation, at the point where the aperture would open, the device tone spikes, the same behavior as before, the higher frequency emerging and briefly increasing. But the opacity in the water does not reduce this time. The aperture does not open. The tone spikes and returns to elevated baseline, and the dark circle sits closed and opaque in the water. The structure signaled. It did not open. I tell Hannah. She watches the device through a 4th cycle. Same behavior. Tone spike at the aperture moment. No visual event. She says, the open cycle was singular. This is the running state. The structure opened once, in response to the alignment attempt at the coastal site, in response to the investigator's presence above it, and confirmed the event. Since then it has been running its standard cycle, signaling the aperture moment without opening it. The window closed and has not reopened. This fits what Maren implied. The structure confirmed the attempt. That is all it was meant to do. I go to the chart room and look at Hannah's navigation notes. The bearing back to the coastal headland from our current position is southwest, 112 degrees reversed. The same axis. The system is aligned and we are on it. 19 kilometers from the coastal site, directly above a structure the network has known about since 1887 and has never indexed as a node. I look at the coastal headland on the chart, the prepared fitting, the guidelines, cut and precise, waiting for something to be placed in them. The consequence mark that the stone prepared itself to receive and has not yet received. The offshore structure confirmed the sequence is running. The stone is still waiting for whatever completes the sequence. We need to go back. I tell Hannah we are returning to the headland site. She nods and begins the departure sequence without discussion. We have both been moving toward this decision since the aperture closed. The investigation's direction has been clear since Maren's line about the prepared stone waiting. Maren comes on deck when the engine starts. She does not ask where we are going. She takes a position at the stern and watches the water behind us as Hannah brings the Morwenna around to the southwest heading. I watch the dark circle from the stern rail as we move away from it. At 10 meters of separation, the device tone begins to settle, not dropping to the pre-elevated baseline, but losing the urgency it held while we were directly over the aperture. At 20 meters, the tone has returned to the continuous directional hold I documented during the transit here. Still northeast in origin, still present, just quieter. At 50 meters, the dark circle is not visible against the water surface. Whatever quality difference it produced has been lost to distance and angle. The device is still pointing northeast, behind us now toward the structure we are leaving. I watch it for a moment and then turn to face the heading we are on. Southwest, back toward the coast. The device behind my back, still locked on the offshore structure, and ahead of us the headland with its rock shelf and its organized marks and its prepared fitting with the guidelines cut clear and the consequence mark still unwritten. Then, at the moment I turn to face southwest, the device tone changes. Not direction. The device is still pointing northeast. I can feel it in the bag, the tone. The elevated frequency that entered the signal when the aperture opened drops away. Not gradually, on a threshold, the same way the aperture closed. The higher frequency leaves the signal and the device returns to its continuous baseline tone. The structure has released its elevated state. I check the time. I count back to when the aperture last opened. 51 minutes of elevated tone. From aperture event to departure, exactly 51 minutes. I do not know if that number is significant. I write it down anyway. Hannah calls back from the helm. Sounder's back. I go forward. The depth sounder display is reading normally. A clean bottom profile, the standard seabed depth for our current position. No stepping sequence, no cycling values. We have moved far enough from the structure that the sounder is reading seabed again. The sounder reads 107 meters at this position. The chart shows 109 meters, a 2-meter discrepancy. Small, within normal survey variation for a chart of this age and scale. I would not have noted it if I had not spent the last 2 hours watching the sounder read impossible geometries over the offshore structure. I note it anyway. 2 meters shallow of chart depth, filed under things that may not mean anything. The 17-second interval has stopped. I realize this as I am writing the sounder reading. The hull vibration that has been present since we first crossed the feature's edge, the low structural rhythm I could feel through the sole at the rock shelf cove and through the hull aboard the Morwenna, is gone. Not fading. Stopped. The same stop as the aperture, the same threshold quality, an absence that arrived rather than developed. The offshore structure is no longer broadcasting. I go to the stern and look back at the water, open channel. The Morwenna's wake spreading behind us, no dark circle visible, no device response in that direction. The structure has closed. Not because we left, the timing does not support that. We had been moving away for several minutes before the interval stopped and the device tone dropped. The structure ran its completion behavior on its own schedule and then went quiet. The same way it had opened in response to the alignment attempt and then continued cycling independently of anything we did. It confirmed the sequence. It ran its completion. It stopped. We are 20 minutes southwest when Hannah says from the helm, "Look at the device." I take it out of the bag. The device is no longer pointing northeast. It is pointing southwest, toward the coast, toward the headland. The directional lock that has been fixed on the offshore structure since the chart room on the Morwenna has shifted and it is now pointing at the coastal site, the same direction we are traveling. The device is pointing home. and in the bag beside it, through the canvas, I can feel the second key pressing against the fabric. Not moving, but present in a way it was not present an hour ago, weighted differently, sitting in the bag with a quality I do not have the vocabulary to describe, except to say that something about it has changed since the structure closed, as though the structure passing something to the key is not a metaphor, as though it is a description. I put the device away and I look at the coast ahead and I do not touch the key. The 11-second interval has not returned.